to make sure that you explain to me what these constructs are so that I know we are on the same page. So these are the things, correlational data and confounds. So what do you mean by confounds? We talked about that earlier.
Which the researcher is not yet aware of, that there is some variable which will affect the results.
Okay. So when you have a model like x is to y and we're manipulating x, we don't know whether x is causing y, so there is an issue of causality. And then we don't know whether what we are manipulating is indeed x, right? So that is the lack of construct validity. So we have all these, there could be measurement issues. So all these could be potentially confounds, which would be considered as insufficient evidence for our model. Okay, so when do we use experiments? To establish causality, right? So that's very important. Okay, so what's a mediator?
Which mediates the impact of a variable x mediates between the two other variables.
Right, the causal variable and the outcome variable. And what's a moderator?
Which affects the relationship between the two.
Sorry?
Which affects the variable between x and y, or two variables.
Which moderates the effect of the x and y. Okay, good. So the basic foundations are fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so do you have any questions on pain or paying?
Okay, no, my question is an extension of what you said last time.
Yes.
Two types of moderators.
Yeah.
Good, please.
Okay, so we could have boundary conditions. Versus theoretical moderators, right? Theory-driven model. So not all moderators are derived from theory. So some moderators, so you could have a moderator that actually changes the mediator, right? And that's a moderator that is usually driven by the theory. But sometimes, you might have a boundary condition saying that, well, this all applies only under these conditions, and that doesn't shed light on the underlying process. So that would be a boundary condition moderator. Let's think of an example. Can you think of an example between the two? Income group. So okay, so let's do an example. Okay, okay. So I'm trying to come up with an example on the spot.
So for example, if you say one advertisement works better than the other, but one boundary condition is it doesn't apply to 3-year-olds and under. So the reason is because they don't even understand what is going on in life, and so it's not going to work for them. But it has no insight that you can actually draw on by this moderator. The fact that they actually just don't know how to process information is the reason why it has no effect. So it doesn't shed light on why X affects Y, right? So that will be a boundary condition that doesn't inform you anything about the theory.
Yeah, I was thinking of the similar thing in the context of pain or paying, right? So if you find that kindergartners or kids, the effect of mode of payment does not hold for them. Why? Because they usually don't buy, so it doesn't matter to them. So yeah, that's what he's saying.
She mentioned that millennials, per se, let me talk about millennials, but she said that people who are not exposed to paying by cash at all.
Yeah. Now that could be a theory-driven moderator. So it could be like, so that is looking at what causes the relationship between mode of payment and pain of payment. So if millennials, for some reason, it kind of goes back to the question of what is the ecological basis of pain or pain? What causes pain or pain? And we don't know the answer to that question. There are so many papers published on this. We still don't know why is it that we feel bad when we spend money in cash as opposed to spend money on debit card. I'm not referring to credit card because credit cards are kind of different in many ways. Debit cards and cash are economically the same. But we still don't know why is it that makes cash different. It is possible that millennials grow up with a different experience, they have a different experience with cash, and they somehow learn to associate pain or payment with debit card and not so with cash. And therefore, in which case, yeah, so it could be that the pain mediator, the pain or paying is indeed different for millennials, in which case it could be a theory-driven moderator, right? But the example of kids, kids can't do it because kids don't buy anything. That's got nothing to do with the theory. It's just a boundary condition. That's the condition under which they.
The income groups, per se, lower income groups in India wouldn't have a card, so possibly.
If low income groups in India don't have a card and
Or
they
they
have
have a debit card at best.
or if they have a debit card and so if they don't have a card, then it's a boundary condition. But if low income groups experience more higher pain of paying because they are low income, then it becomes a theory driven moderator, right? So this is not, this becomes very relevant when you're building psychological models of behavior. And sometimes you write these moderators and say, well, I found an interaction, which is a moderator. But the reviewers will come back and tell you that you found an interaction, but the interaction is not telling me anything meaningful about the model that you're proposing. The fact that mode of payment does not influence kids is not really informative about the model that you're proposing. So you got an interaction, but it's not, I'm not going to count as evidence. Okay? Any other question?
You know, when you're talking about theory,
Go ahead, Paramita.
so when you're talking about theory-driven moderators, it means that there is previous research done on something like that, something similar, and from there you are deriving the hypothesis?
Not necessarily. The answer is that you could come up with your own theory. But the reality is that when you work on any project, and this is kind of a, I think relates to the question I often get from India, like, oh, so what happens to Indian population? Or I talk to people from South America. Or do you think this happens in Brazil? And I think in some sense that's a silly question, because then you're talking about like the research at a different level. So most of the time when you talk about fundamental, what we are interested in is not what market research companies do, but in characterizing some context invariant properties of the mind. So what holds in the US, if it is context invariant, should hold in South America, and it should hold in India too. So usually if you're trying to come up with a generalization or a model, you have to assume there is prior research on it, and you should be able to find the right research on it. So therefore your assumption is that yes, there is some research on it.
You know, the reason I'm asking this question is one of the papers that has been assigned to us, I was actually pretty disturbed reading the paper. In the sense, when I was reading that paper, I found it to be sexist, quote unquote, because it was talking about mate guarding behavior, that paper.
Yeah.
And I thought that when they're talking about that, when somebody spends, a woman spends on luxury products, luxury consumption, it actually indicates that my partner cares about me, and that is the indication that I'm giving. So in my mind, I was thinking, what about women who earn a lot themselves, and they are not depending on their partners to signal anything? Like, what about that? So I was wondering, like, in this kind of condition that we were talking about, so would it be, and in this paper it was not considered at all. You know, what kind of women are you talking to, or what if, you know, here you are assuming that when people wear luxury products, you are indicating to the world that my partner cares about me. That is basically, and I think the paper has done some study in which some kind of experiment was done, but preliminary kind of experiment. Like initially you have given some people and you have done something, and I thought that this is not coming from any theory, earlier theory. So where is this coming from? And intuitively to me, women who are already earning a lot by themselves might not have a partner. There can be single women who don't really care. There can be people with different gender orientation as well. When that is all not considered, how are you proposing this theory? So I had that in mind.
So I don't know which paper you are referring to. Do you know? Can you tell me which paper you're referring to?
This is the luxury consumption thing. I think it is considered one of the things that you have.
Luxury consumption as a signal.
Signal.
Okay. So I'm going to, without even knowing the paper, I'm going to like stick out my neck and give a response to your comment. So it cannot not have prior theories. I mean, it cannot. It definitely will have. There would be at least 20. Yeah, so there will only be 20, 30 references in that paper, right?
Yes.
So if there are 20, 30 references in the paper, there's previous work on that. And so it's not like just any experiment with some group of people there. I'm sure there's a theoretical basis for that. You have to read.
Talk about evolutionary psychology or something, but I was like, have you considered all kinds of people, and like, have you even considered
Okay, so that brings me to another important construct that we had last time.
I think it has some sort of the Veblen effect is there,
So we talked about randomization also in the previous class, right? So,
Yeah.
so-
We did talk about randomization, I was also thinking about that, but intuitively it looked very wrong to me, I don't know why.
yes, so it's very, yeah, so
In fact, it
unless,
could be the other way around.
I don't.
yeah, so this is that's what I said, this is very important for you to internalize this construct. So if there is a paper, there is an experiment published in a top tier journal, in a randomized study, you have to assume that it means that holding ceteris paribus, holding everything else constant, if that's the only thing that is varying across the two conditions, then that result holds. Now your question, Paramita, is that, oh, will it hold in like to everyone? What happens if the woman is earning or something? What are you doing then? You're coming up with a new moderator. You're saying that, well, I'm going to propose a new moderator. Under those conditions, would this relationship hold? So you have to get into the habit of changing the way you are thinking and also changing the way you're articulating. You should not be saying that intuitively it sounds wrong, is this right? You have to assume that, okay, it's a randomized experiment, so the result does hold for randomization. I have a question, does this hold under this condition? So maybe there is a new moderator which the study has not considered.
So that means that's an avenue for future research.
Yes, which means that now she can write a new paper. But for that, she has to go back and really understand the theory and see what could be the moderator and come up with theoretical justification for the new moderators and then develop the theory for that, test for that. Right? Okay, good. So we have some foundations laid. And any questions about pain of pain? I didn't go over all my slides. It's not important. I think I'm going to switch to this next part because instead of kind of going too deep into one area, I'm going to go into the next part I'm going to talk about. And this is about numerical cognition. Okay, this is about very, very foundational basic thing. It's about how the human mind processes numbers. And so I'm going to talk about a bunch of studies. Again, I showed this slide to you previously. So we talked about pain of paying and framing, and I didn't talk about budgeting or mental accounting, but we'll you have the slides, you can go over them. What I want to talk about is how we present prices, how shoppers or consumers see prices, or how the prices are presented to them can influence their evaluation of prices. So what I'll do is I'll talk about 2 or 3 effects quickly, give you an overview, and then talk about a paper that just got accepted, right? So in more detail. And again, the whole process is that, again, we're looking at different projects, we're looking at different theories, different domain, within price comparison, but all of these would hold there. So we will revisit all of these constructs in the context of those projects too, okay? So these are typically the top marketing journals in the US. So the left digit effect was published in Journal of Consumer Research, price precision effect in marketing science, ease of computation again effect in Journal of Marketing Research, and the new paper is just got accepted in Journal of Consumer Research. So typically, if you are in the US and if you want to get like a tenured job, then you need to have papers in these journals. And depending on the tier of the school, the number of papers will vary. So you could have some schools where say you have at least 2 papers would be sufficient. Some papers, most of the top tier schools would say you expect have 1 per year, which means if you work for 7 years for tenure, you should have 7 papers. You work for 12 years, you should have 12 papers. Of course, there are people who do more than that too, but that's the norm. And it usually takes 3 to 4 years for each paper to get accepted. So you should have papers under review at any point in time to meet the record of 1 per year. Okay, so let's start with the left digit pattern. And I don't know whether this actually happens in India or not. I think there was something called bata pricing. I don't know if it still happens in India. So how many of you have been to the US? 1, 2, 3, 4 people, okay? So if you've been to a US retail store, you would have seen something surprising, is that if you look at the ending digits of prices, you will find that they're not randomly determined. So there are around 1/3, less than 1/3, 27% of the prices have 0 ending, okay? And around 20% have 5 endings. And there are a bunch of prices, around 1/3 of the prices have 9 endings, right? And the question is, why do retailers spend this, and does it really matter? So, so this was the very first project that I did, that many years ago, and so if you go and talk to people on the street, they'll tell you oftentimes it doesn't really matter. Like if you tell me the price is 2.99, I know it's 3. Like it doesn't affect my decision at all. If I ask you, if I say the price is, let's say, in India, right, it's 299 rupees instead of 300, would that really matter? How many of you think it will matter? How many of you, raise your hands, how many of you think it matters? How many of you think it does not matter? Okay. So there is one person who thinks, this Krishna, who thinks it does not matter.
I'm saying personal. I know for consumers it matters.
Okay, but for you it does not matter, okay?
As a marketing professor, I've been exposed to this. So
So
therefore I know what they're trying to do.
Okay, so here's my question to you. So we have a research question here. There's at least one person who thinks it doesn't matter. So how would you test whether it matters or not?
I think we can do an experiment. We can X number of people.
Okay.
X by 2.
What is design? So tell me the design of the experiment, experimental design. So when you talk of an experimental design, we're basically talking of something like, how many factors are there. So when you say it's like a single factor experiment, which is only one factor, if the factor has 3 conditions, then it's three conditions. If you do a 2-factor experiment with 2 conditions each, then you say it's a 2 by 2. So if I say that we did a 3 by 2 experiment, we're talking about 3 conditions of one factor and 2 conditions of the other factor, right? So let's start with a simple experiment. So what is the simplest experiment that you could think of to test whether or not the left digit effect would change the price magnitude?
The simplest I could think of, for example, take a lipstick. For example, lipstick I can price it $2.99.
Yeah.
And 300 rupees.
Yeah.
And may allot, let's say randomly, half women to one group and the other half to the other group.
Half, both are women,
Yeah, both of them.
and you have a theory, therefore it will hold only with women.
Since I'm saying no, I'm not saying the lipstick. I'm looking at it.
Oh, so lipstick, okay.
So the nature of the product.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the simplest I could think of.
Okay, so you have like one factor. Half the people will see a lipstick with 200 and the other 299. The other half will see the same lipstick, everything same.
Yeah.
The price will be 300.
Yeah.
And then what will your dependent measure be? What will you ask the people?
So I'll ask them what is the purchase intention.
How likely are you to buy? Okay. So and you are predicting a null effect. You're predicting there will be no effect of between 299 and 300.
No, as a researcher, I think there will be an effect.
Okay. How many of you think there will be an effect? My prediction is that experiment is going to be flat.
Okay.
There will be no effect between, there will be no difference between the 2 conditions. And this is where I think the theory comes in. So yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Does this data also take into account the price range? For example, let's say a $5.99 pack of chicken legs and a $5.99 TV. And so would it affect the consumers similarly?
What do you mean which data? First of all, let me clarify. What do you mean by that? I have not shown you, all I have shown you is this is the motivating slide. I'm just telling you that there is a real world distribution of ending patterns, and will this matter or not? So I have not shown you any data. This data is just for motivating the research question. The data is going to come from you guys, so I'm not sure which data you're talking about.
So
You're basically saying that will the effect, the proposed effect.
the 30.7% of
Yeah.
the product that ends with 9.
Oh, I see.
Right. So how is it 30.7% distributed? Right. So
Cheap products.
maybe
versus-
$5.99. It doesn't matter to me. So I consider it $6.
He's looking at low involvement and high involvement products.
Yeah, so here it's distribution of rightmost digits of 1,415 advertised selling prices. So they just looked at the advertised selling prices, and I'm not sure whether it includes TV and chicken legs or only certain kind of, I think it's mostly grocery products. Okay, so let's kind of, but so there could be a moderator. It could vary with types of products, right? But just let's focus on the main effect first before we look at the moderator. So, so my contention is that Krishna's design is a very simple, nice design, is that you show people a lipstick, Like in one condition, you tell them it is rupees 299. The other condition, you tell them it's rupees 300, and then ask them how likely are you to buy, right?
How the participants are processing that information?
There is no process information here. Okay, very good. That's a nice way to think about this. There is no process information here. But process information is important. But in my prediction is that, based on my experience, that even here you should first have a main effect, right? There will be no main effect on this at all. And the reason is, again, you go back to the theory. Why do you think this will produce different effects? So people who think it will produce different effects, why do you think it will produce different effects?
Because people will think it's 200 and something, it's 300. In your mind, you are thinking 200 and something.
But when you see this, do you see 200? But are you assuming that people only read the first digit and ignore the right two digits?
So it's not it. So if I have a mental thing that this is my budget, for example, that 300 is my budget, or say 200 is my budget. It has actually been 299, but in my mind I might be thinking it's 200 and something, therefore buying it. But of course, if it is an essential, say it's a medicine, then it will not really matter. But
No, Paramita, now you have to get out of the chicken legs, TV, medicine, all of those things. Like focus, we are now behavioral scientists, we're sitting in a lab and we're focusing on one thing. Everybody is seeing the ad for a lipstick. Half of them are seeing 300, the other half are seeing 299. And you ask them the question, will you buy this product? This is to test whether there's an effect of this. And you guys, some of you think that there might be an effect. Krishna thinks that it will not affect me, but if you do this for 100 people, you will find people will more likely to buy here than here. My prediction is that that is not likely to be true. Okay, and I think I'll give you a hint is that because your theory of why these prices matter is not correct, and that's why this experiment will not produce the result that you want, right?
Yeah, to my understanding, the reason why I'm saying it will be different for both the group is because the mental map across the gender or across whatever the category of good is, the 299 is less than 300. What comes maybe?
Why do you think it's less than? That's the core. That's the crux of the issue, right? So when you're reading numbers, why does 299 appear? Why do you think 299 will appear to be lower than 300? And whatever reason you're assuming, does that hold good here? Are you able to capture that phenomenon using this experiment? Why do you think 299 will be lower than 300?
Because that is what we are accustomed with.
No, I don't. I mean, look at it logically, right? I mean, 299. You look at 299.
You should be exposed to both, only then you can make a comparison.
You have to expose to both. What?
They're studying separate. No, you should put them together.
If you're studying them separate, then you think that.
Giving the full picture. So
Okay.
better they're exposed to both.
Because we process numbers from left to right.
That's where the live on.
Pankaj.
We process numbers from left to right.
So we process numbers from left to right, and therefore, okay. So that's, you're getting kind of closer to the theory. So here is why I think this experiment will not produce a result. And here I'll make a small modification to Krishna's experiment where I think it will produce a result. Now, if I tell them that the regular price is rupees 400, and I add 400 to both the situations, now I think you will find an effect. Okay? Why is this? So when you compare the regular price and the sale price, then your judgments of numerical difference are anchored on the leftmost digits. So it's only when you're comparing multiple prices are your judgments anchored on the leftmost digits. If you're not comparing prices, and if you are just doing this, then there will be no difference in price comparisons. So your theory has to be very clear. If you're first, when you design this experiment, your theory was that people read from left to right and judgments are anchored on leftmost digits. And that's where you go back to the literature. When you go back, the literature will tell you that no, people don't. I mean, people read from left to right, but they are not, we don't have, in fact, even if I tell you don't read the right ending digits, you will not be able to stop reading. Your brain automatically reads it. Number processing is inherently holistic in nature. So you will encode the numbers, and there are reaction time data which tells you that yes, your number processing is inherently holistic in nature. But if you're comparing two prices, then before you do the entire comparison, your mind compares the leftmost digit and it jumps to a conclusion fast, and therefore it makes this difference. So how did we test this? So what we did, I'll tell you the experiment that we did now, so we can compare. It's a very, very simple experiment, very similar to what Krishna said. So we actually showed them two pens, pen A and pen B, and we said, okay, pen A is like $5, and pen B is either $3 or $2.99, okay? And we asked them, we went more directly to the process variables. So we actually did not even measure the purchase intention variable. We went to the perception variable, the process variable. So there's another thing that you have to kind of think about when you start designing experiments. So when you're moving from proximal variables to distal variables, so purchase intention is a distal variable, which means it's influenced by price evaluation, but also by other things like how much you like the pen, your budget, etc. Whereas price perception is a more proximal variable that is closer to the construct you're measuring. So it's less affected by other factors. So if you want to amplify your effect size, and if you're just interested in testing the theory of perception, you might want to go to the proximal variables and therefore get higher effect sizes as compared to going to distal variables. So I looked at only the process variable, and my question would be, okay, how high or low do you think the price is? Okay? So in this case, we showed them two pens, and we had it's a 2x2 conditions. So one pair was always, I'm not showing the reference price, it was always $5. So it's 5 versus 3 versus 5 versus 2.99. Okay? And then we showed them another pair of pen, and in this condition, we have 3.59 and 3.60. What are we trying to show here? Because we are trying to disprove another theory which has been going around that, which was kind of consistent with what Sen was saying. There was the theory before this was that 9 endings are seen as a signal of sale. It's kind of, people can, if you see a 9 ending price, people will think that, oh, it's a 9 ending, it must be on sale. Right? That's a very different theory, that price endings seen as a cue is signals something. And instead, what we are saying is, no, this is a much more fundamental process. People read from left to right, and they anchor on the leftmost digits. So we got 3.99 and 3.60. This is using a 9 ending, but the left digits are not changing. They're identical, right? And here, we are using a 9 ending, but the left digits are changing from 3 to 2. And what we find here is when the left digits are not changing, the price perceptions don't change. When the left digits are changing, then price perceptions change. But in this case, there is always a reference price, which is not shown in this graph, right? So what this basically it tells you is that people do read numbers from left to right, and when you're comparing prices, and the price comparisons are anchored on the leftmost digit. Okay, good. So we've got one test. Okay, so now we go to another context, okay? Real estate prices. This is the actual distribution of real estate prices in the US. This is Florida, okay? So we looked at the real estate transactions in Florida, and these are list prices, and you see that this is the number of ending zeros. So around half the prices end with 1,000. So it's like 255,000, 56,000, 57,000, or 357,000. Other prices end with, some of them end in tens of thousands, 250, 260, 270,000. And then there are these prices, approximately 30%, that are more precise. They end in hundreds or even tens or even exact dollar value. So this is like 255,500, for example, only 2 zeros, right? Or 256,900, only 2 zeros. Here there is only 1 zero in the price. And here there is only like 0 zeros in the price. So my research question to you is this. If you are selling a house, okay, now you're listing, the context is changed, right? This is not a grocery context. The context is you are selling a house and you're given a list price. Does the number of ending zeros in your list price affect the amount of negotiation that people do? If so, why? Okay, so now we are looking at the hypothesis generation. Obviously, if you're doing this as a real project, you'll have to do some literature review. But let's test what your hypotheses are, and then we'll come up. I'm going to ask you the same thing. How will you test the hypothesis? So let's first generate the hypothesis. Do you think the number of zeros in the list price would influence negotiations in the market?
So intuitively, yes. Intuitively, it feels like if it is just 200 and
60,000, it's more negotiable than 261,200.
So yes, that's Rahman's intuition is that yes, it would. Okay, so now the second question is why?
Yeah, because it is easy to start from zero to negotiate further. Zero. When you have 200, you can negotiate 200.
No, it looks like it's
Okay, we have to be very careful when we get. So what is your explanation here, Vibha?
Like it's easy to start from zero. I mean, it's the zero ending numbers looks easier and clear to people to start negotiating. So
I didn't follow any of the reasoning that you said. What do you mean zero ending numbers look easier? I'm sorry, I'm going to push you back because I just want to kind of get us into the habit of pushing back.
If you offer me a 1,000 price, I will come back with it will be easy for me to just break it to half, just half.
I think what she is saying is there's a bigger margin. The perceived margin of negotiation is higher if the numbers end with more zeros. Whereas if the numbers are more precise, it's more, I think that's the I got. The margin of negotiation lessens. If the prices are
I see that no different from so I think all those statements are not getting into why. What it's telling is basically restating the effect. Because Rahman has already said that his intuition is that if you have fewer zeros, it will be more difficult to negotiate. People are less likely to negotiate. And you're saying the margin of error is negotiation. You're using the word margin. It's not.
9 in the end, it becomes complex for our mind to process the negotiation part. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but there is no question of 9 here. I'm just asking about the number of zeros.
Rounding off, you said. Like
Yes.
If there are rounded figure, then I'm just talking about the processing. How is it easy? It's simplifying processing. Generally, we are conveniencing. Our mind is, is able to do the routinized things and what I'm trying to articulate.
Paramita?
I have a sense that what Vibha is trying to say might be this, but I'm not sure. It might be like, suppose the price is like, say 2, 3, 5, 6, whatever. I have a feeling that this 5, 6, whatever, this part can be brought down, and that is like they are super, artificially increasing to that level, so that part they know in their mind already that they will, yes. I have a feeling that when it is like that 563, the seller already knows that the guy is going to try to bring it down. And therefore I do this 563 knowing whatever. Is that what you have in mind?
Kind of, simplifying.
On the other hand, if it is like a lot of zero, where do I start from?
Could it be the case?
Okay, let just to clarify. Okay, so the reason I'm pushing this is the following. So we have Rahman's intuition that people are more likely to negotiate here than here. So that's an interesting intuition, and that's counterintuitive, right? It's not that's not commonsensical. And if you find that effect, that's interesting. But if you find that effect and have an experiment or 2 or 3 experiments or even field data and send it to a top-tier journal, they'll come back and tell you, but why? If you don't answer why, your paper is not going to get accepted. So we are in the business of explaining why, right? And that why then should extend to domains other than this. Right, so there was a question asked earlier about the general models. So the general models should usually be context invariant, and it should come from other theories of human behavior that's applicable elsewhere. So that's why I'm trying to push you to thinking that showing that this is more negotiable than this, or people negotiate here more than here, is a good starting point, but it's only a starting point until you come to a theory about why it happens and offer evidence for why it happens.
Could it be something to do with signaling theory? Vendor has signaled that I am firm.
Good. So that's progress. So you have one theory. So what would that theory be? Why would something signal that? What is this being signaled?
Signal is that I am firm.
Good. So there is a signaling that you are less. This is your willingness to negotiate. So number of zeros signal willingness to negotiate. Why would the number of zeros signal willingness to negotiate?
You can put other numbers.
The buyer actually would be under the perception that this price has been arrived at with precision.
Okay.
That's what the reviewer mentioned.
Good. So now we have a theory that yes, first of all, there's a prediction that this will be more negotiable than this. Second, because these numbers indicate the extent of negotiability by the buyer, the fact that the buyer would have put more thought here, therefore that will make him less likely.
The seller has put
The seller has put more thought here, the seller is less willing to negotiate, and the seller is more willing to negotiate here. So that's one plausible theory. And so we have to come up with other theories, and your reviewers will also come up with other theories. And then the experiments have to be designed to kind of rule out all these theories. So let's start with the first experiment. How would you test this? How would you test the intuition? You have a theory, you have a prediction. How would you test this now?
Two different prices of same house in the same locality.
Okay. So what will the stimulus look like? A stimulus is what the participant will see.
Picture of a house, maybe.
Yeah, they will see a scenario, they'll see a picture of a house, and then what? Two different scenarios. And they'll see a price. Right?
Yeah. Scenarios will be same, identical, but the prices will be different.
Okay, so let's use 265 and 265. What price do you want to use?
Your price.
Or what do you think the seller is going to reduce the price?
Do you think the seller is going to reduce the price? Okay. So any critique of those questions?
I would suggest by how much do you think the price can be brought down?
Yeah, which is what.
In dollars.
What's the difference between that question and Sriram's question?
This is a continuous variable, and that would be like yes or no categorical.
That's another important difference. I think his question is already suggesting the hypothesis, right? That do you think the seller will bring down the price? So if I were a reviewer on this paper, I would look at this and say, well, even if you find this, you're finding this only because you are putting it in the review in the participant's mind. What's the maximum price you're willing to pay for this? So everybody will say, what's the maximum price that you're going to be willing to pay for this? Okay, so now even if this experiment works, there could be a confound here. What might be the confound? So what are you trying? What is your key construct you're trying to operationalize? What is your x here?
X is ending with zero, number of zeros.
X is ending with number of zeros, right? So the number of zeros, but this is not just the number of zeros. There is something else is happening. So what else could be happening? Think of like if you really hate this person who wrote the paper, and you want to come up with any reason to say that no, this is not the reason why you find a difference in responses. What reason would you come up with?
There's a difference in there's a substantial difference in the values themselves. So, I might perceive the house on the right-hand side to be actually better.
Yeah, so if you find that people are willing to negotiate less and they're willing to pay more here, you'll say, well, they're willing to pay more here, and what's surprising about this? It's a higher priced house, so they're willing to pay more here.
So the difference between the two have to be very, very minimal.
Yeah, so if it's different, then you could go back and argue that if the effect size is more than $500, then you could say, what other way can you think to counter that confound? So you know what the confound here is? You're trying to test the effect of precision, the number of zeros, but the confound here is 563, which is the patterns of digits, and the magnitude is a confound. This has got a higher magnitude than this. So you're saying this is caused by precision, but Deeptiman will come and say, no, it's not caused by precision. It's caused by a difference in magnitude. This is a higher magnitude, and it's caused by magnitude.
Maybe I do another experiment without real estate and have smaller figures there where the differences will not be so.
Or you could have a third condition where you show everything is the same, right? And you say is 265 and 463. So now you have 265, you can compare 563 and 463 both. This is lower, this is higher. So to the extent magnitude is a confound, you can rule that out. If it is caused by magnitude, you will find the effect here, but not here. But if it's caused by precision, you should find the effect in both the cases and no effect here, right? So you have to think about all these things when you design the experiment, like is there a confound? So you have to always think that Angela is going to be reviewing the paper, and she's going to come up with all possible alternatives and say, well, no, this is not, even if she believes in the experiment, as she's in the interest of scientific integrity, it is her duty as a reviewer to critique it, right? That's what she called upon. She has to say, well, I think Manoj is right, but I will not agree to this because this is not good science. And if I sign off on this, then I'll be contributing to bad science, right? So she might be, so you have to kind of, again, think about what could be the potential confounds and then address all of those. Let me quickly tell you what we did. Okay, so why, first of all is, why would this happen? So one of the theories that you proposed is that people might, the number of zeros is a signal of the seller's thoughtfulness or willingness to negotiate. I think that was your theory, right? Sellers are willing to negotiate more if they don't think about the price too much. If they set the price very carefully, then they're not willing to negotiate. So that's your theory. So the theory that we came up with is something more basic fundamental. So I've always been interested in like the non-conscious processes. So what you have articulated could be true, and I don't think the experiments are going to rule that out, this experiment per se. But there is other data which might call into play. I mean, I'm not going to get into the nuances here. But my interest largely is in not the deliberate part of it, but the non-conscious part of it. And my theory is that it comes from this. So this is the distribution of numbers in written communication. Like I think it's both online and print communication in like general communication. And what you'll see here is the frequency. The y-axis is the frequency, the number of occurrence, and the x-axis is the numbers. So you see that number 2 or like very small numbers, 0, 1, is very, 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 very popular, right? This occurs very frequently. So small numbers occur very, very frequently, and the larger numbers we are less likely to encounter in our written daily communication. But there's an interesting pattern here of spikes. What do you see here? So these are all the round numbers, right? So you use 1, 2, 3, you see very, very frequently. 5, somewhat less frequently. 10, less frequently. And then between 10 and 20, very less. And 20 more frequently. Between 20 and 30 less, then more frequently. Then 100. 100 is more frequent. Then after 100, maybe 500 is more frequent. So the higher the higher the magnitude, you are less likely to see numbers that are very, very precise. When you see a higher magnitude, you're likely to see it rounded. Stated differently, if I ask you how much you spent on gas in the US, you will say I spent $2.84. You will not say you spent $3 because 2.84 is meaningful, right? But if I ask you how much you spent on your car, if you spend $28,400, you'll probably say I spent $30,000. If I ask you what is the GDP of India, you'll say $2 trillion. You will not say it's 1,900,563 because a trillion is a big number. So big numbers, we tend to use more zeros. Small numbers, you tend to be more precise. And why is that? It's because of this distribution of numbers. So you have this conscious, deliberate part of the brain which is doing all the math and coming with explanations and all of that. But our brain is much smarter, and it has got one component which deals with situations and learns things even when beyond our conscious processes. And it learns to associate that the number of zeros is associated with magnitude independent of that is predicted by the rules of math. Are you following what I'm saying? That more the number of zeros, usually higher magnitude, fewer number of zeros, less magnitude. And that's independent of the rules of arithmetic. So to test this is not a part of the paper, we did it independently, and it's a pretty nice kind of, it took me some time to come up with this elegant question, right? This is a scenario-based study, it's not an experiment. This is a scenario-based study just to kind of test the intuition. Consider two numbers x and y. The number x is rounded to the nearest 1,000, the number y is not rounded. Which number is likely to be smaller, x or y? And then which number is likely to be smaller? So 69% people say that y is likely to be smaller, one that is not rounded is likely to be smaller. I have not even told them what the number is. All that I've told them is that one number is rounded, the other is not rounded. Which one is smaller? It seems that the number that is not rounded is not smaller. So it's kind of some way of testing the intuition that there is an association between roundedness of numbers and magnitude, right? So how do we test this? We test this exactly the way you guys designed, you guys told. So we showed them 3 houses. There was a picture of a house, there was a scenario. You want to buy a house in Sacramento, this is one of the houses you're considering, and people entered the willingness to pay. And we had 3 different replicates, right? So we had everybody saw 3 different houses, and then we have 2 versions of this. Any guess on why we had 3 different replicates? So you could say this is a 2 by 3 design, okay? So 2 factors. One factor is the roundedness versus precision. Half of them saw this, the other half saw this. And 3 is the within subjects factor. So do you guys know the difference between within and between subjects? So within subjects is when it happens within the same participant. So that's and whereas between subjects is 2 different groups are seen. So why did we choose to have 3? Any guess? basically to see generalizability. We see the different patterns of digits, and it's not restricted to any A pattern of digits. Second, replication also gives us more data. Okay, so when there is more, so each person is now giving 3 responses. So if we collect data from 200 people, we have 600 responses.
Is there any reason why you don't have any numbers ending with digits less than 5?
No, this is just one of the experiments. Across experiments, we would have used multiple different kinds of numbers.
There are more replicates than this.
There were more experiments. There are several other experiments, and we use different types of numbers. And basically, what we found is what your intuition was correct. The intuition was that people are less likely to negotiate when the number is precise. So 375,000, they're willing to offer 324. 374, 576, they're willing to say 332, right? So precision does matter. Okay. I'm just quickly show you this. We also looked at the real data from Florida, and we ran a regression, okay? And we looked at whether the dependent variable is the sale price, okay? And the independent variable is we have the list price and the number of zeros in the list price. And you can see the more the number of zeros, lower is the sale price. So more the number of zeros in the list price, lower is the sale price, okay? This is also convergent evidence. But what is the problem with this study?
There could be many other factors which will impact the sale price.
There could be confounds, right? We don't know whether this is indeed the causal factor. This is just an association between 2 different things, precision and sale price. There could be confounds. And the experiment, therefore, addresses the confound, okay? So this one has more internal validity. This one has a more external validity. And you have 2 different types of studies, one showing that it happens in the real world, the other establishing causality. And now you feel more confident saying that I think this really happens, and it's really caused by precision, and it happens in the real world. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about a third phenomenon. And this is very close to, let me not give it away till at least, yeah, let me ask you first, and then I'll tell you. But the hint is very close to what Angela is going to talk about later. Okay, so we have product A and product B, okay? So I'm going to get a volunteer. Pankaj, which discount is higher? Quick. Pankaj, which discount is higher? A or B? Quick, 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 don't think much.
B.
Okay. Is it? Now think carefully. What's the difference there? This is 2.07 and this is 2, right? This is 2.07, right? $2.07, and this is $2. Okay, so and this is Pankaj, don't feel bad about it. You're not the only one. It happens all the time. Now the question is, why does it happen?
The system 1, system 2?
Yes, but that's too superficial. You're not going to publish a paper by saying that.
Again, the thing about people, how they learn subtraction is that they learn subtraction by left-hand side. So
Yeah.
they start doing subtraction.
No. I want you to focus on this model. So X, what is X, first of all? What is X here? What is the theoretical construct, A? And what is a mediator? And why is it affecting Y?
X is the precision.
This is a difficult one. If you get this right, yeah, this is really, it's not that easy.
X is the precision of which, or the complication of.
Good.
Complicated is the subtraction.
Yes, X is, let's call it exactly the term that you're using. Because the terms are not important. The meaning is important. Complication of subtraction. Okay, good. Okay. And what is Y? The judgment of the difference. So we know the complication of subtraction affects the judgment of difference. How high or small, large or small the difference. The question is why? What is the mediator? And if anybody can get that, I'll be really, really impressed. Oh my God, good. Awesome, very good. Okay. Okay, now you have to tell me why. Why does? Okay, you gave me the term. But now you have to explain to the class, why does processing fluency explain this?
Because we find it easier to subtract numbers which are whole numbers.
Yeah.
Than numbers with I think decimals. That's the thing. And we learn to do subtraction with whole numbers and then we move on to decimals while we are learning arithmetic. So,
okay. This is easier. We learned this, but none of those explain that this is larger. Why should this be larger?
Are people too lazy to actually process the information?
Okay, so people are lazy, they don't process the information. But why should, by the way, he just called you lazy, Pankaj. Right? But why should laziness lead Pankaj to...
Coming back to some of Angela's paper that we read, is that this is positively construed and this is negatively construed. And for us, when we are looking at discount is positive. So
Good, very good. So that is one account, okay? So processing fluency is positive. And I think that was one of the accounts that the reviewers came up with. It might be Angela who was a reviewer. Maybe she came up with the account. But that is not the account. So let's come up with another account too. Now you're kind of really getting into the meat of the stuff, right? So we know that the potential mediator is processing fluency. And now we're trying to examine why does processing fluency affect judgments in this particular context. If you understand that, then we're going to contribute to the literature on processing fluency in some way. So one possibility is a really good possibility that ease is good. So if it's good, then, so that's kind of, there's a lot of work on that, and I'm not going to take away the stuff from Angela's discussion. She's going to talk about that. It's beautiful. Like, it's a very, very important theory, and I don't think a lot of people really understand how powerful it is. This was kind of my dissertation, and for me this was really, really exciting because what I learned, what is personally exciting for me is that when you are thinking, how do we know whether you're thinking right or not? How does the brain know you're thinking right or not? The brain monitors how we feel when you are thinking. So metacognitive monitoring is an essential accompaniment of all our cognitive processes, and it's metacognitive experience that tells us whether we're thinking right or wrong. And sometimes those metacognitive experiences can be inputs to our judgment. Okay, so they can be inputs to judgment using, the affective rule that if it's easy, I like it. So that's one account. There could be another account too. Can anybody guess what the account is?
Brain works for maximum efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So to cut down on maybe the energy levels, or maybe to cut down on processing part, it goes to the immediate processing.
That doesn't really explain. Brain is efficient, doesn't want to do calculation. That doesn't explain why it should be lower. Okay, so I'm going to, okay. So here is, again, an intuitive scenario-based study just to explain the point. Okay, I'm not giving any numbers. The price difference between X and Y is very small. The price difference between M and N is very large. Which of the two judgments will be easier for you? Most people say M and N is easier for you, right? So why does this happen? So what it tells you is that it's easier to discriminate between an ant and an elephant than to discriminate between an ant and a fly. It's easier to discriminate between 2 and 3, between 2 and, let's say, 500, than between 2 and 3, right? So the brain always maps the numbers onto a sensory continuum or a number line. And whenever those mappings are very close to each other, then it becomes difficult to discriminate between those two numbers. And so quite contrary to what you guys are saying, the brain is not lazy actually. This experiment might mislead some people to conclude that people make mistakes, people are lazy and all of that. Quite to the contrary, we are demonstrating this as a bias, as evidence for the fact that the brain is learning things and associations even without our awareness, and sometimes mistakenly applying it, but most of the time applying it more meaningfully. So the alternative theory is that when you experience difficulty, and this is, so there are two different dominant theories of fluency. One is based on the fact that fluency is affectively balanced, right? If it's easy, then it is, you like it. The other one is called heuristic misattribution. So you process something and it feels difficult, that difficulty violates expectation. You say, oh, this is not supposed to be difficult, like what happened here? And that expectation, so you look at this and it violates, oh, like this is more difficult. Your brain is trying to process, but your metacognitive part of the brain is saying, oh, this is unusual. I shouldn't have experienced this. And when you experience that difficulty, it triggers an attribution process. What usually causes difficulty? In the context of numbers, when the numbers are closer to each other, that's when you experience difficulty. When the numbers are far away from each other, then you don't experience difficulty, right? So you have now two theories to test. One is Angela's theory of affective valence, right? That if it is easy, I like it. The other theory is heuristic misattribution, that in the context of numbers, difficulty is misattributed using a particular heuristic theory that, oh, if it is difficult to process, the numbers must be small. Like difficulty, mental processing or processing difficulty is the cue of discriminability. One is a very cognitive process. Like you invoke a theory and everything is happening in a fraction of a second. And you can't ask people because they don't know anything. So you have to have designed experiments to tease out these two theories and say which theory is under operation here. Okay? So let's start with the easier experiment. So how will you test that this effect is indeed caused by processing fluency? So you have an intuition, you have a problem, it seems to be an interesting problem. Like if you tell, well, retailers might care about this, it's important to know. You have some theories. Now your task is designing the experiment. How would you design the experiment?
How quickly the person responds?
Sorry?
Will it also be like how quickly the person responds saying?
Yeah, so yes, that's a good suggestion. So reaction time. So you should measure reaction time in this experiment, right? Because reaction time is an important variable.
Or we don't give them much time at all.
We could make it,
Or when we say they have to respond in 5 seconds.
we could do that too. But these are two different approaches, right? Yeah. One is, Paramita is using reaction time as what we call as a process variable. Okay, somebody else. So what is a process variable?
You measure it and then you sort of check how respondents have done.
Yeah, so this is a process variable. A mediator, if you measure a mediator, that is a process variable because you're getting evidence for the process, right? You understand, you have a theory about the underlying process, and you're getting evidence for that. So reaction time could be a process variable, or reaction time could be a boundary condition, saying that, well, this will happen only when respond fast. And the question is, which way do you want to direct your theory or your testing? Do you want to use it as a boundary condition or as a process variable? Okay, good. So you want to use reaction time as a process variable. What is the IV? What's the design of the experiment? It's too tiring after lunch?
Just show the two calculations and check how much time they take to respond. How many of them get it right?
So just show them this, and you think the experiment will work? One group will see this, another group will see this, okay? And
What do you think is the
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Sorry, if it is which of the two discounts is larger, then of course.
Yeah, but you can't, we will not. So that's one way to do. That's a scenario-based study. Kind of we know that. But if you want to kind of show more detailed process measures and like a proper experiment, what is the design you will use? The task is clear, right?
Add more products where the prices are not so close.
Can you repeat that?
Add more products where the prices are not so close.
Okay, so add more products. You show them multiple products. And then what? This is a between subjects. Some people see this, some people see that.
Here the price difference is like 2 point something.
Yeah.
So you can have numbers which are in the form of other away from each other.
Right.
The difference is larger.
Right, but you don't answer my question. Do you want the people to see both these products or just see only one of the conditions? The same person to see both the products? Okay. And you think the effect will still happen if the same person sees both the effects, both the conditions? Good, very good. Okay, so now you're getting into the nuances of experimental design. So once you have an experimental like a theory in place, you have to consider various things. And in this case, we have to keep in mind two things. One is, this is going to be a very, very small effect. Right? We know that these kind of effects are going to be very, very small. The effect size is important, but sometimes in these kind of experiments, we know that the effect size is not going to be huge. Okay, so if you do between subjects, there is going to be noise across the two conditions. When you do an experiment within subjects, what you're doing is that it's the same participant who's seeing the stimuli. So the experimental noise in the ANOVA model caused by the subject's factor is not there, which means that you're able to detect the effect size with greater power if you actually use a within subject design. Okay? And more importantly, if you're using this for reaction time, there's a lot of variance in reaction time across people. But if in the same person sees this and this, so between Paramita and Diptiman, Paramita might be inherently much faster than Diptiman, right? So if I might not be able to detect the effect of this processing difficulty if I do a between subjects, if only Paramita sees the difficult ones and if only Diptiman sees the easy ones, because the inherent difference in their processing time will swamp whatever effect I'm trying to look at. But if I make Paramita see both these numbers and Diptiman also see both these numbers, the fact that Paramita is faster than Diptiman will not count. Then I'm only interested in the difference in these two numbers. Okay?